thanks everyone for coming. We've already talked, so maybe this is redundant, but.
No.
Anyway, yeah, so it's, thank you for having us. We, as we were talking to a lot of you already, we arrived yesterday in London without our stuff, and we're in hot pursuit of our luggage. So, but it's not looking good, actually. So Trevor and I started working together. This is just, well, this is the second guitar.
Yeah.
Third, kind of. We made one, and I put it on Facebook, and someone bought it, so
Oh yeah,
it didn't work out. And then we made, I made him a Blackwood guitar, which was a few months ago, I guess, and that sold to someone local who, or not local, but within the UK. And then this is one that I just built for him last week. We just finished, and it's koa back and sides with mahogany neck, and then my standard detailing is ebony with koa purflings, and I make all the bindings and purflings myself, and they're one piece. So instead of having those perfect miter joints, I have now the perfect miter joint. In fact, I've had people argue with me, you know, that's a great joint. I said, it's really good. Couldn't be better, since there is no joint. So some of those little details, that's kind of how I like, that's my aesthetic. What I like to do is try to have things be very simple and elegant and like last through the test of time. So my entire look, it's all based, I designed all my guitars based on shapes that I liked, but they're all based on kind of sizing that you would find with Martin guitar. So I do an OM kind of size, which is not this one. This is more J200-ish. It's 16 inches across in the lower bow. But they're all a little bit more of a narrow-waisted guitar shape, which when I started making guitars in the 80s, it wasn't as common to have this. Now every single guitar is something that's kind of similar to this. So I'm happy to talk to you guys about my philosophy and my story, and also, or we can just, I can answer questions too, because you know, I came all this way just to meet everybody who came here, so whatever you might want to know. But I'll start with, we were talking about when I started and everything. When I was in college, I was able to, they didn't have a study program for making guitars, but they had independent study, so I was able to make instruments, and while I was taking a music program there and get credit for it. And then I took that a step further and did an apprenticeship. I was going to school in Washington State, and I did an apprenticeship in Santa Cruz with a guy who makes violins, and he was making archtop guitars as well. David Morse, he's a really crazy guy, incredible craftsperson, but a nut. But it was interesting, and I built, so my second instrument was an F5 mandolin. My first was a dulcimer that I just made while I was in college. So after working with him, I just got super excited about doing this, and I met another guy who was working there at the same time, and he and I just started a little shop in a garage when I left the apprentice of David Morse. I worked 1 year for him. Then I made my first guitar, and we were talking about guitars not working. I built the guitar box, and I came in the next day. I used hide glue. Came in the next day, and the guitar fell apart completely. So I didn't have there was no humidity control, nothing, and the glue didn't set properly, and it was in pieces when I came in the next day. And that was my first actual guitar, and I was kind of sad. But rebuilt that, and I've never built a single guitar, and now, well, it's been since the mid-'80s, and I've never built one that wasn't sold, so everything was pre-sold. And my first actual guitar I built in trade for a bicycle frame. I'm into cycling a lot, and that guy didn't get a good deal, but I did. But now, who knows, who has my very first guitar might be worth something eventually. So, and as I was working, I opened a music store with a friend of mine, kind of like this store, only with only a very few products, and we just put all our own guitars on the walls to sell. And I did guitar repair. And then I left there when Santa Cruz Guitar Company was hiring their first employee, so I became that person for 5 years. And in that 5 years, they went from just me to about 6 employees, and I oversaw their production at that time. And then I left there in 1991 and opened my current shop. And that's my wife back there, Corey. And we got married that same month that we opened the shop, and so maybe not the smartest idea, but it worked out. And yeah, it's been very good. I ended up, as I say, every guitar was pre-sold, and I used to use a lot of koa, a lot of maple, a lot of Indian rosewood, and I never used much Brazilian rosewood. And then I happened onto a Brazilian rosewood stash from a old guy who was a wood turner, and he was given all this leftover wood that was being used for veneers for pianos. And the stock of wood that he had in his warehouse was like just in inches. This 4 inches thick, like 24 inches wide, 12 feet in length, all quarter sawn Brazilian. That was insane. Like the best. You could date Martin Guitar Company guitars from this wood. And he never used it because he became a wood turner instead of a cabinet maker. And I bought it from him when he was 82, and that was actually over 20 years ago. So then Rick Turner and I resawed it, and it just turned out to be the most amazing Brazilian. So I've been very lucky with Brazilian, which I know is not something Trevor ever wants. It's what I build all my guitars out of, except when I make a guitar for here. And I make about 12 guitars a year. I work by myself. I have a person that helps me with the office stuff, and then this year, from time to time, I have a friend that comes and helps me, another great guitar maker, young guy, Steven Strong, who sells guitars here as well. Sometimes he'll help make some parts for me. And so that's kind of the story. I love doing this work still as much today as I did the day I started. There's something, I think most people here are either guitar makers or make things or play, and you know, that whole sense of making something that's going to last and stand the test of time. We were talking about that earlier. And be passed down to generations is really nice and fun. Anyway, it just is something that, for me, it's really important to make something that I feel will be passed down, you know, through generations. Even though at the moment the guitar playing public is a bit on the fickle side. With my guitars were never high end when I started. They were $300 was the price, and I raised the prices a little bit each year. And when they were at the $3,000 price range, someone resold it for $28,000.
Whoa.
Yeah, so they took that guitar, resold it for $28,000. I guess they just had this sense that due to the materials and stuff, maybe I was going to be the next person that was going to get well known. And as it happened, that did happen, so they made kind of a good move. But at the time, I had an 11-year backlog with 120 guitars on order, and everyone started selling their spots, or they would trade them or get the guitar and sell it immediately after I built it. I could answer any questions if people have questions about what I do, or I can tell more about my philosophy. Or is there anything particular anybody wants to hear about, or what I do specifically?
Yeah, the top of the guitar.
Yeah.
Is it just spruce, or do you use other materials?
Yeah, actually, so all of my spruce, I'm kind of picky about my woods. I came to Germany in 1989, and I bought enough German spruce for my whole career from this one guy. There was
Wasn't a Black Forest, was it?
Yeah, it was. Yeah. So the guy's name is Gleisner. Tonewoods is the name of the place. And it was funny because Corey and I went. It was 1990, right? Because we were here.
1990, that's right.
We
yeah.
came here for the World Cup because Corey's huge football fan. Not fan, but she was a player and coach, and I knew really very little about the sport, but Corey played and coached since she was a kid, and it was her life. So we came to the World Cup in '90 to Italy, and on our way we bought wood from this guy. And so we went to his workshop, his place, which is a really nice, like you say, in the Black Forest, and there's a few different people selling instrument making wood, mostly violin stuff. So he brought us in and he put me in front of a pile this high, about like this. And he said, okay, go ahead and pick the wood. So the wood was terrible, it was junk. And so I looked at it and I said, okay. So I just picked really quick, and I knew it was a test, so I looked and I picked, about every 8 sets I picked one. And I took it. And after maybe 3 or 4 minutes he said, stop, just stop. Then he takes me to a whole nother location. And the wood was insane. Because he was testing me to see if I even knew what I was doing with the materials. So once he took us to this new pile, and again, now almost every set was fantastic. But I also I tried to take a percentage of stuff that wasn't the very best, because I wanted to, not just be this person who's picking through, just calling off the top, just the best of the best. So I bought all this wood from him, and then when he sent it to me, he sent me 100 sets for free. Just said that some of the wood might not be perfect, so I want to make sure you have what you need. So I was able to buy all my wood for my whole career from this one person. And it's Alpine spruce, German spruce as they call it. Whether they got it out of Czechoslovakia or Germany, they say the high mountains of Germany, but it's kind of hard to say. It could be along the same lines as the Italian spruce, the same area where they've been getting it, through centuries for violins and stuff. So that's what I prefer. The other wood that I do use is Adirondack spruce. So sometimes people request that. This happens to be German spruce. The Adirondack also has a very similar tone, but it's quite a bit stiffer. So you have to treat it differently, but it does give me the kind of sound I like. I'm into balanced tone. I don't want to hear a huge low end, but no trebles, or good low end, good trebles, and no mids. I like my mids. I want everything to speak. That's what my goal is. So if you're playing here in some kind of open voice chord, I want all the notes to ring. I don't want just that note to be good and then it to be, thuddy in here. That's not what I'm after. So it's a different kind of sound, but I want it also to speak up the neck as well. I don't want you to fall off tonally up there. And I like the overtone series, but I don't want it to be overpowering, so it's not. I build a light guitar. If you felt this guitar, it's extremely light in weight, and this is a large-bodied guitar. It's, as I say, it's kind of J200 in equivalency, and so it's not small, but it's light. And this whole, of course I was inspired by early Gibsons and early Martins. That's really where I got my experience, because I did repair on these instruments for a long, long time. So everything I do is kind of based on that. So the way my bridge is shaped, the original inspiration for this was when I rebuilt a Weissenborn guitar that had that kind of bridge that's similar to this. And then I took the kind of curvature that happens on old Martins, and that I based everything. We were talking about engineering, so for me, engineering's an important aspect to it in terms of the way I build. So the radius, I have a radius on the top of my braces to keep it into a curvature, and the top, that's a specific radius for the top, which is 30 feet, but I sand the side assembly to a 50-foot radius so I can achieve this neck angle, which is 3/4 of a degree. That's what I want on my necks, so I don't get too much breakover, but I don't have this ski jump issue that happens as time goes on. So a lot of my inspiration for making guitars is to not do repairs on my own guitars, since I've done so much repair work on everything else. And over the years, I've developed a few things that are different to my instruments that you don't see. They're just interior things. Or this one brace that you do see, which is slightly unusual. It's a floating back brace. That came from my interest in, because I did neck resets on guitars with super like guilds that had ultra thick tops, ultra thick backs, insanely heavy Paduk necks. I was just trying to figure out what's going on regarding the engineering of these things. And, lateral braces from side to side are ultra stiff. An X brace on the back is good in certain areas, but everything defaults when you just take the back alone and try to go from end to end. It's just obviously super weak. So once you add in the blocks and create the box, that's where you get your strength. But there's still movement, you know. These blocks, it doesn't take much movement for the neck to pull forward, because it's 160 pounds of pressure trying to tear this bridge off and pull the neck forward. So it doesn't take much forward pull or upward pull from the top before you run out of saddle, and then you need to do a neck reset. And so because I specialized in neck resets my whole career, I didn't want to do them on my guitars. But I do believe in this is a tapered dovetail neck joint that's glued in, it's not a bolt-on neck. So I just didn't want to be in that situation where I'd be doing a lot of warranty work, since I wanted to just keep the shop by myself, you know, not have people working for me. So I really haven't. I think in my entire career, I've done 3 of my own neck resets. I've done over 2,000 neck resets of other people's instruments, including some really incredible, like over $100,000 Martins and some neat guitars. So that was the inspiration for this brace, and then that brace.
Can I just actually,
Sure.
that the engineering of that particular thing, you know, what is it that moves to cause the action to raise over time? You know, there's all sorts. You were thinking about that, but so there clearly is an engineering failure. Those enormously coveted old Martins, they all need neck resets.
Yeah, so what's happening is, because that's exactly why it inspired me to make this change, because of working on those instruments, and you can make this block size quite large and still not solve your problem. And the issue is, and I can't speak to it specifically from a mathematics standpoint, but I just know this happens. It doesn't take a whole lot of, if this block rocks very much, and as it moves forward, it's stretching the back of the guitar.
The back is in tension.
Yeah,
Yes,
back's in
yes,
tension,
that's
so
my-
it starts stretching
So
that
can
back.
you say where the beam is attached?
Yeah, I didn't say, but it's, so if you look inside, these lateral braces have a dado cut in the center of it, about, just about halfway through. And then I glue that brace into
The whole length?
the whole length, and it already has the same spherical, the radius on the back is like a 12-foot ball. So if you took a 12-foot ball, that's what I did when I first got my shop. I have a large shop, and before putting anything in there, I made radius fixtures by taking a 12-foot long piece of wood and a 50-foot and a 30-foot long piece, and I attached a router to it, and then I cut my patterns. And then I made all my radius jigs from that. So I took those patterns and then duplicated those on the router, and then made a square box, put those patterns on the outside, and then put another piece of wood with a router attached in the center, and then built round forms, and then just ran the router, spun the form, ran the router. So that was funny making those fixtures. Anyway, so those were my gluing and my sanding fixtures. So essentially, from my experience in repair, I just thought what would be obvious is to put something in between the 2 blocks, say a tensioner that you could tension. If you did that, you'd never need, of course, a neck reset, but you'd also have some really weird sound issues going on. So I did a ton of experimenting with different forms of bracing over the years, and nothing was great, because from the lateral brace from side to side is unbeatable. It's just extremely strong. And so I thought, why don't I try to do this brace? And I did a lot of incarnations on that particular brace. till I found what I thought worked best. And I was able, in the process of doing that, to decrease the size of all my other braces. So I actually was able to lighten the guitar and make it structurally stronger and not get any weird tonal effects. In fact, what ended up happening is that back brace enhanced my arc. So whenever you glue something in woodworking into a curve, even if that curve is pre-engineered, unless you're doing laminations, you're gonna get spring back. So as you glue the brace in, it's gonna hold this curve and then it's gonna flatten out as you take the clamps off. So when I glued that brace in, it didn't spring back anywhere near as much, in fact, hardly at all. And the consequence of that is I just got a better coupling between the back and side assembly. Because there's a lot of guitars in here, and some of them might have a double thick side. So some people do a very stiff side to back thing, and in the violin world, it's like that as well. There's very thin woods all around, or there's thicker sides, thinner back and top. So just what I like to do, my sides are very thin. They're about 2.1 millimeters. My backs are about 2.2, 2.3, and then my tops are tapered, so they're anywhere from, on the bass side, about 2.1, and this is all dependent on the way the wood reacts, how stiff the wood is. 2.1, and then to about 2.3 in the center, 2.2 on the treble side. So I use, excuse me?
Thinner on the bass side, thicker on the treble
Thinner
side.
on the bass side, yeah.
That's really interesting.
And
I went to classes at it was the London College of Furniture in the 1970s, and they taught us to make guitar fronts thinner on the bass side and thicker on the treble
oh,
side.
they did. Well,
And I did that for many years,
yeah.
but in an entirely at-home amateur basis, and then came down to Sussex and met a lot of other makers and started talking to them, and I have to say they all completely rubbished the idea.
No, it's critical. I mean, it's
but
not new though.
no. I'm categorically
Yeah,
saying it's not
and
new.
all of these
so I stopped
ideas-
doing it. So.
Well, I remember I used to make, I think one of the first people to do, I don't know, one of the first people to make it popular, the fan fret on acoustic guitars. And of course, I saw the fan fret idea from an electric guitar maker named Ralph Novak, and I built my first 8-string fan fret, and I got a call from a person here in Britain in the UK, and he was studying at a very famous school, and I don't want to remember it wrong, so I won't mention it, but because I don't recall. But he said, "Oh, it's so great that you are remaking the fan fret, and you must have used the Opharian, I think it's called, as an inspiration. The instrument that was made in 1520 or something like that, with fan fret, steel string." And I'm like, "Oh yes, yeah, I very much studied that, yeah," because he was doing his whole dissertation on that instrument. So it's so interesting that I think a lot of guitar makers I've heard say over the years that they started doing this because they didn't like what was there before them, and they wanted to make a better quote-unquote guitar. That never was the case for me. I'm still aspiring to try to make a guitar that can hang out in the grouping of these great instruments, because the instruments are phenomenal, and I think mostly where we're lacking is the ability to play the instrument, at a level that the instrument can be played. And I think it's just been so inspirational to see some of the great players over the last 20 years who started taking up steel string guitar, because it was always really more the purview of nylon string guitar players to have the high level of playing. And now people have taken the steel string from, I get a lot of customers that are either, they've come from the jazz world or the classical world into steel string guitar. And now it's become super popular, obviously, to have great players in steel string, but it used to be, I think, really singing, that kind of thing. And now
There was an undercurrent though, because I've been playing in some people here. I know they've been playing a long time, and way back and started in the early 60s.
yeah.
And there was a movement, a lot of it based in Soho in London, with people like putting out Stevie Graham, and where they were taking the steel string guitar and then progressed on to people like Martin Carthy, Simpson,
Yeah,
Nick
totally.
Jones.
Tony
But that was quite a long time ago.
Yeah.
So there was, even then, we were looking at the steel string and thinking, yeah, there's some virtuoso players on there.
Well,
And
I
we were
mean-
trying to educate the sort of the nylon community into sort of look at the steel strings as well.
Well, it was so amazing to me because I got a huge inspiration before I was even a guitar maker when I saw Laurindo Almeida, this great classical Brazilian player. And, you know, I saw him perform and it was insane what he was doing on a guitar with super high string height and you know, no intonation. Nobody was thinking about intonation. They were just making the guitar work with nylon strings and playing at this super high level. And then when I heard some of these people play on steel string, because I guess I'm also attracted to the sound of steel string guitar. I like a flat top steel string sound. There's certain nylon string guitars that I've had the opportunity to hear in my life that have blown me away, but not as many do as steel string end up doing. And then as you go from here, say closer, you would move from this to, say, the Sobel style. Then you might move from Sobel toward the Macafari style, and then you might go to, say, a Ken Parker light arch style. Then you'll go to a standard arch style. And all those sounds in between, they have, you know, really neat things you can do with them, specific musics. But nothing seems to me to lend itself to more players than this type of sound, in my opinion. You know, really anybody can learn fairly quickly and to play and sing a song and feel like, wow, this sounds good. And if you do, you know, to me, attack is important. I keep this ugly nail just so I can get this, because I want to get the most out of my sound. I mean, I'm not looking to play it as hard as I can and make it, oh, why is it buzzing? Well, I don't know, you know, it doesn't have to necessarily. So, I think a guitar is an imperfect instrument anyway, just as regards perfect intonation and playing in tune. It's a challenge to the player more than it is the instrument's forte. You know, like a piano has the ability to play so well in tune, and guitars. That's one of the. I build guitars for Raul Midon, this guy who was just being played in this cafe next to Cruz just now. But he's a blind guy, and he's just one of the most monstrous players I've ever heard. And he just hears every detail. And what he goes on and on about with my guitars is the intonation, how it plays in tune, which is the simplest thing ever. I mean, I'm not unclear why anyone wouldn't have that, because it's just an extremely simple arithmetic issue. Anyway, it ends up being something where there's a lot of little details that I do, like I tilt my saddle back at 5 degrees. The way I intonate it. There's just simple mathematical things that I do to make the guitars play in tune, and a lot of that came from, like in the 70s, Martin was mispositioning their bridges on a great number of their dreadnought guitars. For whatever reason, somebody built a fixture that everybody then used over and over again, and it placed the bridge forward by about 1 millimeter, and so the guitars were all out of tune. And so I did so many. Take the bridge off, make a new bridge, oversize, reglue it, make it play in tune, or plug the saddle slot, move it back. So essentially, this instrument, when it's played well, I don't know, there's something just really satisfying about the sound for me. And that's the reason I've always just specialized in this instrument. I built a mandolin, I built an F5 mandolin, that was my second instrument. But it worked okay, you know, some person still has it, she's the second owner. But I've always and am still trying to perfect this type of instrument, and I still love doing it. I don't do, as you can see in the store, there's so many interesting architectural things happening, but that's just not me. I just go for a really simple thing, which I hope people find, you know, elegant and satisfying today, and they find it the same way when they play 10 years from now.
Mm-hmm. Can you talk a little bit about the bracing in the top?
Sure, yeah. So the top is much like a Martin. It's an X brace, so the X brace goes on this instrument from about here crosses there, so it supports my bridge. Then I took from a classical guitar, there's a plate in here that is shaped like this, like that, like that, like that, like that, like that. So it goes straight across. Anyway, it's just supporting, it's on the inside edge of the sound hole. If you look inside the sound hole, you can see a little plate there. And that's from the classical world. But it's very thin, and I've set it back from the edge. If you look at nylon string guitars, it looks like the top's ultra thick because they glue this secondary piece of spruce there, and then they round the sound hole that way. I've left mine back from the edge. So that's slightly different in the steel string world. Then there's a brace here, then there's a flat brace here. Then on my instruments, there's 2 tone bars, one here, one here. Then the bridge plate, again, is about the size of Martin's. It's a very small bridge plate. It's only about 1.5 inches in width, and it's curved on the front edge and slightly curved on the back edge. But it's a laminated bridge plate made from maple and Brazilian rosewood. The maple is at about 1.8 millimeters, and the Brazilian rosewood is at 0.5 millimeter. No, sorry, the maple is about 1 millimeter, and the Brazilian, no, it's about 1.5 for the maple and 0.5 millimeter for the Brazilian. The maple's running with the grain of the top, and it's glued to the top. The Brazilian rosewood is running perpendicular to the top grain, glued to the maple. That's a bit of a different thing than some guitar makers.
So what's the reasoning behind that?
Because I used to have to, there's been, you know when you get that bellying that takes place on some guitars behind the bridge? That's another contribution to the neck reset issue. The top of the guitar bellies up so much that it ends up raising the action. You lower the saddle.
So it's about stiffness. So it's about
Correct.
the top stiffness
It's about
rather
stiffness.
than acoustic
Yeah, so
transient. I mean, you were talking about attack.
yeah,
So that's a very interesting point, isn't it? So the rate the sound is delivered from the string,
yeah,
that whole transducing string energy through the top
yeah.
comes through the saddle.
Yeah, so it's, to me, this is one of the most critical parts of the guitar to me, and the most important things that I key on, is that entire, this string angle is very important to me, the saddle angle, the way my bone piece connects to the bottom of the ebony, and that's glued to the top, which is then transferred through the bridge plate. These things are super important to me in terms of tone. And again, tone is subjective, so you might play my guitar and say, I don't get it, but it's important to me. But all these things connected together contribute to 2 things: the tone of the guitar, and then the next thing for me is the playability of the guitar, and the third thing is the longevity and the ability for it to stay together and not need repair work. Not to say that my guitars won't, if they're in super wet conditions like this, or it gets super dry, or it gets hot or cold, you know, it's going to need neck adjustments just like anything else. But I try to engineer in a way for these things to feel like they're not really made of anything. Yeah, you know, try to create an egg is the whole idea. You know.
Can you share what sort of adhesives you use?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, no, it's a big secret. No. I either use hide glue, traditional hide glue, which I make myself and melt and heat in a hide glue pot, very old school, or I use Type Bond, which is just aliphatic resin glue, yellow glue. Those are the only 2 glues that I use. I don't use any epoxy. Super glue I use for these side dots. It just works fantastic for that. So I do have one thing that's kind of a secret, I guess, but what I do, something I started doing when I worked at Santa Cruz Guitar Company. We built a bunch of Brazilian rosewood guitars, and 33 of them came back to the shop because they were all cracked. And Brazilian rosewood cracks, that's what it does, that's its thing. So it was my job to repair all the guitars. So I stripped everything, and then I started experimenting with glues, you know, how to fix that without taking the entire guitar apart. So of course the super glue thing is the first thing you try, and that works okay, but it's not really fun to use. Anyway, over all these experimentations, I found a marine epoxy that I liked. And what I did is I heated the guitar back and sides, and I let it expand. The heat expanded the pores. Then I put in the epoxy. It's a very thin epoxy, and then I completely wiped it all off. Let that sit for 24 hours and sanded it back, and that did a really great job of fixing the cracks. So I started using that epoxy treatment on all my guitars prior to building them, and I haven't had very many Brazilian rosewood guitars crack over the years. They do still, but I preempt it with that particular treatment. And that was also something that ended up kind of giving me a little tonal boost too that I didn't expect. But, and I have hence found out that Ken Parker also does that, who's, I don't know if you guys have heard of Ken Parker, but do you remember the Parker Fly guitar, that unusually shaped? So that's Ken Parker, super genius, probably the most genius person in our business. And now he had way back then made archtops as well, but now he's specializing in these incredible archtop guitars they weigh the same as a flat top. And they're just highly engineered, and he's a real engineer and machinist, and he does this just incredible stuff. So when I found out that he used my technique too, we both came up with it on our own. That was nice.
Is this similar to the epoxy people use for grain filler?
I don't have any idea. I don't use a epoxy for grain filler.
Z epoxy is
No, it is not. No, this is called. It's called West Systems.
Oh right, yes.
Yeah. So and it's a 2-part epoxy. It's 501, I think, and 201.
It's used in boat building, I think.
It's boat building epoxy.
105, 205.
Yeah.
I use
Is it 105, 205?
I use it in boat building.
There you go. Okay, great. So 105, 205. Yeah. That's what I use, and it just obviously it's a tested, tried and true material for if it can be used on boats. It's easily works on guitars. So anyway, these are just little precautions that I use. That they're accidents that have happened that have made my guitars sound a little better, and I know that because I didn't use it for so many years, and then because again I don't do different guitars and I don't change the bracing like a lot of, if you take say Michi's guitar, every one's a little different usually, maybe a whole wildly different. But for me, because I've used the same shapes and the same style of bracing until I change it, I had a lot of instruments that I could really compare A, B.
And the same wood.
Same wood too,
Because
yeah.
that just, backtracking, but when you said you bought a lifetime supply of wood,
Yeah, from
on the
one
hand,
source,
that
yeah.
means over the years you will really get to know how to use that wood.
Yeah.
On the other hand, it might go out of fashion. Something better might,
Well, I figured that,
it's,
the violin makers were using this same wood, it's the same wood, and they used it forever and ever and ever, and all that happened to them is that now everybody's buying Stradivarius for millions of dollars, so I'm just thinking, these are a bargain at the price they are now. Trevor's like, oh! Yeah, sure.
Got a question about your bridge.
Yeah,
I'm a long way away, but it looks very delicate to me.
it is, yes, so.
Is there a reason for that?
Yeah, it's a very specific size and a specific thickness, and so overall, over the years, again, from repair work, I got a chance to see, this is super important how thin the outside edges of your bridge is. If it's, some guitars, I'm just trying to look here, there aren't a lot of traditional bridges here, but you can see Bill Collins is the best example. So he's using really as close to an exact copy of pre-war Martins, except that, on that guitar except we both use, our bridge pins follow the same angle of the saddle, so for compensation. So this, depending on the overall thickness, because I'm looking for a certain neck angle, and that neck angle is important to me for a number of reasons. Tone, how much what kind of breakover you have here. In the future, I don't want this guitar to pull forward and have this part of the fingerboard go up. called the ski jump. So then as you play, you get a lot of buzzing up here, or you play down here and you have back buzzing, and you have to remove the frets and do a lot of work to it. So I engineered this, my fingerboard's pretty specified and pretty specific. It starts with a radius of 16 inches. Sorry, this is all answering your bridge question, but it's a compound radius, so it flattens out as it goes up the neck. And then I put from the 12th fret to the 22nd fret, there's a 10 thousandths drop off, so from 0 to 10 thousandths. And what that does, it allows me to, when I do my fret jobs, which I do, so this is a dovetail neck, so I put the neck in with some shims and clamp it into place, but I don't glue it in prior to any finish on the guitar. Sorry, there's 1 day finish on the body of the guitar. Then I clamp the neck in, and then I tape this end of the fingerboard down, but it sits up just a hair. So I'm now spending a fair amount of time in this area sanding this out, so I get a really nice plane from the entire neck. Then I install my frets prior to finish, pull it out, and then I spray the neck separately from the body. So I get a really clean finish everywhere. And if it does need a neck reset, it comes apart without ruining the lacquer. So Martin used to use 3 different bridge thicknesses. And over the years of doing neck resets on those, I got to see the best sounding ones were always at about 8.4 millimeters, and that's what I use in the center. And then there's a specific curve, so it's thinner on the treble side than it is on the bass side. Then you need to remove the mass on the back of the bridge, and then you have to remove the mass on the feet. That's my opinion to get a certain kind of sound that I want. There's a ton of bridges in here that are absolutely the opposite of what I just said, and that's their thing, and they're great sounding guitars as well. They're just not what I'm trying to get, you know. And the thing about sound, again, no one can build my guitar because it's not me, and that's only me. I'm the only guy who can hear this my way. I've told I've told a number of guitar makers exactly what I do because they ask me, but their sound then ends up being their sound. They take some of what my knowledge is and make their own thing. And for me, my inspiration again was older guitars. So I took, you'll find this same kind of dimensioning going on in all of the, when you play the best older guitars, you'll go, oh wow, yeah, okay, I see. The bridges are delicate, they're not some big, heavy, massive thing. If you do a massive bridge, you'll get a certain sound, and that's totally, again, fine. But, you know, if you look at, I think nylon string guitars are always a great example because they're extremely similar. And it's just, it's something that's important, and it's one of the things that I feel a lot of guitar makers don't see because they don't have the ability to, or sorry, because they haven't had the opportunities to do guitar repair like I have, or studied what the old guitars were like. And yeah, so that's, my bridge is 8.4 in the center, that's the thickness, and then it's about equivalent to the width, the length of a Martin bridge, and the same with the width. So if you started with a bridge blank like that, you'd have a similar size. And then my inspiration for the bridge was a Weissenborn. I did a complete retop of an old Weissenborn. That was one of my early repairs in the early 80s. And I just thought it kind of looked neat with that. And then I added in this, this is just, with a chisel I just carved this detail in. Just looks nice, it's not a tone thing. But it's taken me a long time to really develop this bridge the way I want it, from a sound standpoint as well as an aesthetic standpoint. And I really like it, I think it really works. And when I did my tone, my bracing on the top, as you were asking before, one other thing that I did, there's a Canadian guitar maker, his name is Sergey, and his last name I can't remember right now, but he was doing like a patch of spruce here. So if it runs kind of at this, in my guitar it's a triangle, and it's running off, it's you would say it's perpendicular to the grain, but it's not exactly perpendicular, so it's running, the grain's running this direction to the top. And instead of having the two side struts or tone bars, whatever they're called here, I've replaced it with a very thin patch of wood that's not dissimilar to this patch of wood under here. And that also did a lot for my sound and also lightened up the guitar and also strengthened the guitar. So those are the things that I do differently. The bridge plate, those two which I stole that from Sergei. This, which I just ripped off from classical building, but made it thinner than they do. And then the bridge plate thing, which we used to do a lot on some stubborn guitars where you had to, on vintage guitar repair, I never changed anything from vintage. So I would never do that on an invaluable vintage guitar. But on a guitar where someone wanted to play and they were having this problem, because there's a lot of guitars where they chose a top wood that wasn't strong enough for a guitar. And you can do a neck reset on it, and then a month later you need a neck reset again. So just doing that over and over again is not working. So that's when I first started changing the grain direction of the bridge plate. And of course, as you talk to repair people, famous repair people that are older than I am now, have been doing it forever, they said, oh yeah, we used to do that from time to time, it's a common thing. So then I just started researching that for my own guitars to see if that would be a thing to do for tone, and because I knew it would work for strengthening, and I wanted to be sure it would work for tone, and it totally did. And of course for me, because I really have, I'm not lying when I say I've never built a guitar that was unsold, an acoustic guitar. So for me, I'm kind of experimenting on somebody's guitar, obviously, because I don't want to build it and then if it doesn't work, I'm still giving it to them. No.
Have you found, because you said you used two different glues, what glues do you use for the bracing when you put those on? And have you
I'll
experimented with
either
that?
use a hide glue for everything, or I'll use an aliphatic type bond for everything.
Right.
I don't actually mix them. I do mix them sometimes, but
And have you found a difference between the two when you do?
I have not. And I did this is just my own personal experimentation on my guitars. I built a number of guitars side by side with hide glue versus aliphatic glue, because some of my customers said that hide glue is much better. So I just thought.
So that's what you fancied at the time?
Yeah, well, because hide glue's been used throughout time, right? And it's great. It's a hot glue, and it's really nice. But it's more finicky, right? You have to make it correctly. It has to be heated correctly, and then as it's applied, it's best applied if you heat not the glue's hot, but also what you're gluing it to is hot.
Yeah.
So that then meant that I had to create some sort of heat source from above, because I use a Gobar deck. Are you familiar with that? So I had to create another heat source to get my pieces hot, and it was just, it was more trouble.
Yeah.
But I wanted to use it. I like it, and I do use it, but I don't find that it's better. And I've had guitars out there since 1981, and none of them have fallen apart ever, so I know that this type bond isn't a glue.
Yeah.
And I've dabbled a little bit in some of these white glues that were available from guitar supply places, but I didn't like those. Didn't like the way they set up. Some people have tried to use glues that dry harder to try to improve the tone, but I really like this original tight bond yellow aliphatic glue. And again, experimenting side by side, as much as you can compare two of the same guitars built in the same way, I didn't hear a difference.
Yeah.
But if the customer does, then I'll be happy to do it. It's fine.
And do you tune your fronts at all when you're bracing? Do you tune them?
No.
You just take it to a certain size, but you do.
Oh
everything.
no! Sorry, no. I don't tune it in the sense of tapping on it and generating the tone, and then saying it's at
So you
G or A or
flex
whatever.
it and
But I do. They're all different based on how the flexibility and the tap tone is.
yeah.
So I'm tapping on it, but I'm listening for it to open up. So, and you can really hear that. That's not any kind of science. That's a really easy thing to do. If you take a piece of wood and I don't know if you've experimented, but as you're making a guitar, you take a piece of wood and you thickness it to 2.5 millimeters, say any piece of wood. Now you take it down to 2.2 millimeters. You're going to notice a huge change in that piece of wood from the way it vibrates, but also its weight changes dramatically. So it doesn't always mean it's better. You don't necessarily want the thinnest pieces of wood, but what I like to find is this ability. I kind of like to find where I feel that I'm maxing out on the piece of wood. In other words, that I'm able to get the most out of each piece of wood that I use. And in combination, that means that it's kind of that 80-20 rule where 80% of the time I take it down to 2.5 and I'm totally safe. And then the 20% varies. So
Yeah.
something might go to 2.2, something might go to 2 millimeters if it's really a stiff piece of
Yeah.
material. So.
And the
That's-
variation in the thickness from bass to treble, at what point do you put that in?
I put that in before bracing goes on, so I'm able to sand that into my operation by having the table be tilted, so that as I sand it and then turn it around, I can start. Yeah, so I have that ability in my tool with something that I built into my system. And it's subtle, right? And of course, then, once the guitar is made, you have to sand it, right? To do the lacquer work. So you're obviously, I hand sand everything with a hard block, so that one thing about my guitars that's different than some is it's really quite flat. Because I keep that hand sanded process throughout my entire finish. I spray the lacquer and then I use a hard block to sand it. So I have an ultra thin lacquer, too thin really.
Is it nitro or?
I spray nitrocellulose, yeah. And it's what I like. I've never tried polyurethane and I've never tried varnishes because I know how to do this and I know how to get, people want this kind of finish. This is the one area where I would like to change because I love the way it looks, but I hate doing it. It's such a pain. Like my tops are about 2.5 thousandths, so super thin, thinner than a piece of paper. And so Collins is at 7 thousandths. Santa Cruz varies from 7 to 15. They're all over the map. Or maybe not anymore, I shouldn't say. I don't know anymore. But so anyway, it's ultra important to me to have the thinnest amount of finish on. But I need to achieve this look because people, they want to see the shininess, you know. It has to compare favorably. Like some people aren't doing it, that guitar doesn't have it. That's a Loudon, it looks like maybe, or Loudon-esque. Anyway, they use kind of a flat finish, which would be so much nicer to use for me, but it's not, I can't sell that look because my prices, they're so expensive that people, they're not gonna accept anything but this kind of look at the moment. My friend, again, my hero kind of, Ken Parker, makes these arch tops. They start, I think, they're between 30 and 50,000. And the finish, he uses the West Systems epoxy as his finish. So he puts it on and he wipes it off super carefully so that it's actually his finish. And then he hand rubs tongue oil into that. True oil. I don't know if you know that stuff. He hand rubs this true oil and it gets this neat finish that's.
So does he do that with a micro mesh or a fine?
I don't think he's using micro mesh actually. He puts his epoxy on with it's a special towel that we like. It's called, the brand is White Ball. I don't know if you've heard about it. It's a really cool paper product. I think it's a US made product. It's called White Ball. They're a big orange box. They're amazing. He puts it on with that. And then how he puts on his true oil, I'm not sure what he uses to do it. Maybe micro mesh, but I'm not sure. It's a quick finish, super fast.
Yeah.
He prides himself in that. And it's a neat looking finish. If I felt I could sell it, I would, because this is just so much work. And it's always the one thing that goes wrong, always, no matter what. You chip something and it's like, oh no, or you rub through and you have to respray. And the respray then turns from a tiny thing like this to a huge mess.
Yeah.
And then the customers paid you, because I get my payment 3 weeks prior to shipping.
Right.
So now they paid me $26,500, and I rubbed through it. It's like, ah! And you know, they're always, so you're gonna ship it Monday, right? Yeah, oh yes. But I always know, you know, I'm gonna probably screw it up. So anyway, that's a process that I say I really hate it, but I love the results, so I kind of enjoy it. But the wet sanding, it's a lot of work, and then I wear a powered air respirator all day. So for 8 or 10 hours a day, I wear something that weighs 10 pounds because I got allergic to the wood dust when I started working at Santa Cruz Guitar Company, because they were sanding. I was sanding ebony for them, like 50, 60 ebony planks with no mask or just a little paper mask, and I'm just covered in black dust, and pretty soon it got to me. So I've had to wear this powered respirator my whole career, and it's been a good thing. But if I didn't have to say spray lacquer, it would be kind of neat, but that's not going to happen probably at this point.
You talk about the thickness,
Yes.
or rather the thinness of
Yes.
the top. So do you want it thin for acoustic reasons?
That's my belief, yeah, because it's lacquer. The reason I use nitrocellulose, it's not anywhere near a natural product, but it is it's a bug lac, so it is a natural base, and then they're cutting it with terrible thinners. So once that thinner evaporates, you're kind of getting a more natural material on top, and I feel it's important. Varnish is always, you know, shellac or varnish has been very important to the nylon string guitar board from a tonal standpoint. So I like a thinner finish for a ton of different reasons. It creates this, again, my bridge being glued here, when you pluck the string on the guitar, the bridge goes like this, right? So it's now driving the front edge of the bridge on top of your lacquer. If that's really thick, it's going to create, and this is what happened to some of my early guitars when my lacquer was thicker. I didn't know whether I wasn't focusing on thin lacquer. So as it started rocking like this, it literally just cut into the lacquer and then lifted the edge of the lacquer. So you saw like a white line in front of some of my old guitars. So I wanted to do away with that, and because I set my bridge on top of about a little under 1 millimeter of lacquer is underneath my bridge and underneath the fingerboard edge. And then if my lacquer is thin, then either hide glue or aliphatic glue the viscosity is thicker than the lacquer, so you get a perfect glue joint, but you also get a perfect clean look. Because I want, again, from my repair background, I want to be able to take this neck off. I want anyone to be able to take this neck off anywhere in the world and not have any problems, not curse me when they're doing it. But they can take the 15th fret out, drill a tiny hole, insert steam, or now we have these cartridge heaters that are really, really small, and you can put a cartridge heater in, no more steam, and then press the neck out, and then be able to remove this bridge and not damage any of the lacquer. That's the goal. Because again, as I worked on a 1930 OM45. It was unplayable, but it was all original, perfectly original condition. All the bar frets are original. They only made 6 of these in 1930. So I did it for a music store owner who bought it for 20 grand from someone, and then George Gruen bought it for 65,000. So I was doing it for the 20 grand person, but also for Gruen, and they sold it for 120 grand, and I couldn't make any mistakes, and I couldn't have it look like it was done. So there was no touch up. The original saddle had to be used. So that's what's neat about dovetails. You can, if it's fit properly, you can string the guitar up dry with whatever saddle you want and know exactly what action you're going to get, and then set the neck back a little bit more until I got the exact action the customer wanted with that exact saddle. It's rare that you get these old instruments that have all the original parts that haven't been touched, but this was one such instrument. And I did the whole job for $300, so I made the least out of the groupage. But I got a nice letter from the end user who bought it for that $120,000, saying that how much she liked the job. So those kind of things all inform me, and I feel that's one of the things partially lacking in the world of guitars. Because if you look, like I can look in here and see a lot of guitars that didn't look at what came before them and some that did. And if you look, Collins is one of the best people because he has studied the guitar thoroughly and the mandolin too. And he's built his company around making really nice copies of those kind of things. And he's really gotten the dimensions correct on stuff. Same with Santa Cruz. Santa Cruz didn't come at it from understanding it from a historical standpoint, but their aesthetic was quite light and nice too. So it's just little things like the height of my binding. You'll notice it's not tall, and there's specific reasons for that, Gesundheit. So I can look in here and see some that are quite large, and it just ends up being heavy, and it's kind of harkens back to a time in guitar making, like in the 70s when a lot of like Michael Gurry and stuff were making instruments. They're kind of a wave of American builders that were doing not marked copies, kind of that same idea, like, oh, I want to improve on the guitar, you know, I'm going to come out with a better instrument because the ones that exist aren't good enough, which is that's just not true. So anyway, just getting, there's everything I put into this has to do with the literal aesthetic weight as well as the actual weight, tonal concerns, playability concerns, and longevity concerns, and that's it for me. Obviously, there's aesthetic stuff as well, and it's, there's little things like I like to have this side angle go back, which is, if you notice, on Martin guitars it's a 90-degree thing, but if I'm bringing back this, Gibson used to do this, and it's just a really nice look. Mandolins have it. Just tiny little details that don't matter, but they do to me. So that's my whole thing. That's everything.